the Dialed In Angling podcast presented by Onyx Fish and Runnings. Well, here we are, mid-October. It's hard to believe. As an angler, as an outdoorsman, even people that just live in the Midwest, it seems like summer goes so quickly. This year was no different. I can't believe we're already at mid-October. If you're in Minnesota, you know that this weekend marks MEA weekend. It's when all the kids get Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday off of school, sort of a fall break. The teachers do their thing in Minnesota as far as conferences and that sort of thing. You know, me as a Minnesota kid, looking back to MEA, that was a weekend that I just cherished being with my dad. I remember, going perch fishing on Winnebagosh and crappie fishing and walleye fishing and fixing stands and checking on stands and getting things ready for deer season and grouse hunting and shooting our guns and getting them ready. All of the above when it came to MEA weekend. That was the weekend that just sort of kicked it off for me as far as the heart of the fall season. It's no different today. Well, it's a little bit different in the sense where, I'm not going fishing, jumping in the boat with my dad. Now the roles have changed a little bit. My dad comes fishing with me. I had an opportunity this week to fish with my Uncle Gary. We went perch fishing. Looking forward to getting out with my kids. I know we're doing somewhat of a cast and blast weekend, but man, being someone that's been traveling to, Mille Lacs, Leech, Winnie, all over the place this week, it's starting to ramp up with vehicles, with four-wheelers, ATVs, UTVs, stands coming north, people with trailers with deer stands on them, people with boats. I know my phone has been ringing off the hook as a guide service to, take people out fishing this weekend. It's great to see people are taking advantage of it. I think this extended nice weather that we've had in the fall so far in the Midwest really has people fired up as far as getting out. And when it comes to fishing, taking advantage of it before things really drop off or the bottom drops out, because it's coming soon. For me, it's always like this abrupt end to a guiding season. And then I continue to fish generally right up till deer season. But there's been times in the past where I've fished well into November. But then it always seems to come to this screeching halt at some point, whether it happens in early November, late November, it's going to happen. And if we look at the calendars, we're only a few weeks away from even some of these lakes getting iced up. And I know for a lot of people, they just aren't looking forward to that. For me, an angler that loves, that the 4 seasons of where we live, in the Midwest, I love open water season when it comes to spring, summer, fall, and then of course, winter with Dialed In Angling. We've got some meetings next week. We're going to be talking about the Dialed In Angling TV show, the new season 3 coming up. Really excited about that. But I want to touch on this peak season, this peak fall season. This is sort of the bell curve before it starts to drop. This is sort of the crescendo at the end of the season. We talked about it last week on the Dialed In Angling podcast with Mitch and Rem, how we're just now approaching that peak season as far as the fall bite's concerned, where you have an incredible jig bite for walleyes. You have phenomenal smallmouth fishing. You have incredible pike fishing. The muskies are coming in. The perch are biting like crazy. The panfish are biting. The time is now for this peak feeding period in the fall. The fish have the feed bag on. Surface temperatures now are in that lower 60s, upper 50s realm. That is ideal for fish catching, for fish biting, and the time is now. So if you don't have plans for the MEA weekend and you still want to get out and take advantage of some great, phenomenal fall fishing, I'm going to break down a couple of bites that I've been on this week that I'm telling you, if you've got kids, if you've got grandkids, if you've got neighbor kids, if you got, you just want to get out and maybe, run some fuel additives through your boat and get that kind of scratch that itch before fall or before winter season hits. This is the weekend to do it. It looks like a little bit of rain on the front end of MEA weekend if you're in Minnesota, but then it's going to clear out and we've got excellent conditions as far as Saturday, Sunday. The winds are going to be light. You're going to want to take advantage of it. So I want to break down a couple different bites that I've been on this week, because once again this week, I want someone to pinch me because I've had an incredible fall. Going back to early September, if you've tuned into this podcast, with the colder temps that we had in early September, it sort of dropped that surface temperature from that really warm surface temp that we had all summer. And it sort of kick-started this fall bite. And it sort of remained there. We had surface temps in the 60s all over the state of Minnesota. And so I've been able to take advantage of a lot of different bites out there. If you've tuned into this podcast, everything from lake trout to pike to walleyes to panfish, and then back again. And this week was sort of that. I didn't do any lake trout fishing, but I was concentrating on walleyes, perch, and I did get out to do a little crappie fishing with my dad and my Uncle Gary as well. I'll elaborate on that, but let's just start and break down a few bites that I've been doing that have been really ramping up. One would be Mille Lacs Lake, for example. Mille Lacs has been sort of an okay bite all summer. I've been able to get my customers, catching them in the shallow rocks, a lot of bobber fishing this summer. I did do some snap jigging of the Crush City plastics, either Mayer paddle tails or the new jerks, which are the minnow style or the fluke style. That bite is really starting to take over. Not just the plastics bite, but we're getting into, you can snap jig hair jigs, the moontail jigs, the VMC moontail jigs are one of my go-tos, not just on Mille Lacs, but all over the place. Hair jigs have really started to shine this week. And then jigs and minnows. They're starting to eat the jigs and minnows on Mille Lacs. We started seeing it up on Winnebagosh. On Leech Lake, they started switching over to minnows early last week. If you listen to the podcast with Mitch and Ram and I, when we were talking Leech Lake, it was a lot of kind of back and forth between the crawler bite and the minnow bite. The minnow bites here, they're starting to feed on shiners. I'm starting to see a lot of bait fish move in the shallows. If you launch your boat, whether it's on Mille Lacs, Winnie, Leech, some of these smaller lakes, and you start seeing, seagulls or terns diving in that shallow water, that means the bait's in. And that means the bait fish are moving in, the walleyes are moving in, the fish are moving into the shallows. And during this time frame from, I would say, 60 degrees surface temp till you hit about 48 degrees surface temperature, those fish will remain in the shallows. You can go out there and catch them in the morning. You can catch them in the evening. Later in the fall, it's more of an afternoon evening bite, but right now it's like game on. As soon as you get out there, the fish are biting. They bite all day long. That high sun during the day really starts like supercharging the bite. I've noticed it over the last couple days here where we've had a few cold mornings where it's been, 36, 34, 33, even 40 degrees in the morning. As that sun comes up, it seems like about 9, 10 o'clock, these fish, we're catching them right away in the morning. But those fish just start firing, and you're catching perch, you're catching walleyes, you're catching pike. Everything just starts ramping up as you get towards that 1, 2 o'clock hour, and the surface temps have really heated up. Things are just snapping. Midday bite is incredible. And once again, it's been jigging. Now, my preference of jigging is generally I'll start out with plastics. Like if you jump in the boat with me as a guide, this time of year, I'll start out with plastics. I might put my customers on a jig and minnow. But I really, really like the VMC Moon Eye jigs. If you're unfamiliar, it sort of has that aspirin head design. It's got the big eyes on it, and it's got the bait keeper on the back. That way, if you're fishing big minnows, you can rig that minnow where you're putting the hook out behind the head and then kind of hanging that lip, on that bait keeper. It's a really, really nice jig for, let's say, golden shiners that you get this time of year, because golden shiners are super soft. And if you just hang it on a plain lead head jig with no sort of bait keeper like that, where you don't have that wire system, it's really hard to keep those minnows on, especially if you're just hooking them through the skull, because they have a really soft skull. And so I like to go out and go behind the skull in mid-body and come out through the mass of that meat and then hang that lower jaw on on that metal bait keeper. Same can be said for smaller red tails, small chubs you get. I know a lot of bait shops have sort of a river mix. So you get a mix of minnows from silver shiners to goldies to rainbows to fatheads to, whatever. And it's nice to have that bait keeper on there. I know for me, that's probably my go-to jig. I don't always use those. This week I've been going to a lot of like tungsten moon eyes, especially when I've been perch fishing. Just the other day on Winnebagosh, we use the tungsten moon eyes with the jerks and really snap jigging those things and seeing them on forward-facing sonar. But when we switch back over to live bait, we would go back to those VMC neon moon eye jigs. And for Mille Lacs, for Winnie, for Leech, that blue fire tiger, that green UV fire tiger, all really, really good colors. As we get into mid-October, the water's starting to clear up on a lot of these lakes. For Mille Lacs, for example, the last month, the surface temp has been, the surface clarity has been quite dirty. We had quite the algae bloom in the summer. A lot of even our small lakes that are generally clear had somewhat of an algae bloom. Also, I think with the, early spring and the no ice, we had a lot of vegetation. A lot of these lakes had sort of algae growing on rocks. As that started to die off when we got into late summer, early fall, it sort of dirtied up the water. And I know we've had a lot of wind that impacts surface clarity on these lakes. But man, lakes are getting really clear. If you fish Cache, if you fish Winnie, Leech, Mille Lacs, all these lakes that have zebra mussels have gotten so clear, especially in different areas, that I've really tried to seek out areas of the lake where I get a little bit of water clarity. So, for example, if you have a southeast wind for a couple days, which we've had a lot of east and southeast winds, as soon as that wind switches northwest, you go to the west side of the lake, and it's interesting how dirty some of these lakes have gotten and some of these areas of these lakes. So I've been seeking out these areas where you get a little color into the water. That's going to help with your bite. So if you're heading to Leech, if you're heading to a Mille Lacs, if you're heading to a Winnie, any of these lakes, seek out those areas where you get a little bit of stained water. Also, a lot of lakes that I've been referring to, these big lakes, these walleyes have been shifting really shallow. That's not the case on all bodies of water. As these, weeds start to die off, vegetation starts to die off, some of these lakes that these fish are focused and live in the weeds all summer, as that vegetation starts to die off, they'll actually pull out, and they'll pull out on the edges of these basins. They'll be in deeper water situations. And so I want to talk and touch on that as well in this podcast. But let's just break down the lakes as I've seen them this week, because I really want to give a great fishing report, and that might determine whether you go to these particular bodies of water. Let's start with Lake Winnebagosh. Lake Winnebagosh is on fire. If you want to catch eater-sized walleyes, if you want to catch some decent-sized walleyes mixed in as well, Winnebagosh is really hard to beat right now. Plus, the jumbo perch, I wouldn't say are everywhere in the lake, but when you do catch them, they're really nice size. There's a year class in there that's grown up as a result of a lot of different smaller baitfish hatches, young of the year perch hatches, which are everywhere on that lake. That lake is absolutely full of young of the year perch right now. It's amazing how much bait is in that lake right now. So I think that's given a chance to these jumbo perch that are out there, these bigger perch that kind of live with some of these walleyes without getting eaten. And if you're heading up to Winnie, most of the depths I've been targeting has been anywhere from 5 to 10 feet, depending on that water clarity. Some parts of the lake are extremely clear. And so unless you have wind, you're going to want to go to areas of the lake that are a little more stained or churned up. And Winnie gets really churned up, especially when you get big winds like we've had the last few days or the last couple of weeks. And so I'll seek out those areas that are really churned up. Prime example, we had a big blow last weekend, southeast wind, just pounding that west shoreline. I went to the west shoreline as soon as that wind calmed down, and boom, the fish were everywhere along the west side of the lake. And I was absolutely pounding them in the weeds. I was pounding them in the rocks, in the sand. I was catching fish really, really shallow with forward-facing sonar and casting to those fish. And that's a key to Winnebagoche. If you're going up there, plan on pitching jigs. The old way of just snap jigging underneath the boat, unless the water's really dirty and unless you get out into that 10, 12 feet or deeper, it's really hard to do. I watch these fish get spooked after spooked after spooked unless you're casting to them. And I was catching fish up in 3-4 feet of water the day after a blow by just simply casting to them. And I've primarily been using plastics. I've been using the Crush City Jerk. I'm using the Crush City Mayor, even the Storm Largo Shad in the 3-inch size, and snap jigging those. Some of my go-to colors, obviously the smelt color, albino shad, gizzard shad, even that natural perch color are all good go-tos. If you want to get really good at fishing plastics on jigs and snap jigging, Winnebagoche is definitely on fire right now to get really good on plastics. And another kind of 1-2 punch with that, if you don't want to fish live bait and you just want to experiment, is the moontail jig. That moontail jig right now shines bright like a diamond, unbelievable in shallow water. You can pitch that thing out, rip it straight up in the air, and let it fall. Now, Winnie has a lot of kind of dying vegetation, green slime. It's got starry stonewort, which is an invasive species, but it kind of coats the bottom. So it's extremely hard to jig fish or drag a jig on the bottom with minnows in particular. But if you're snap jigging and you're throwing jigs out there, snapping it straight up in the air, letting it momentarily touch the bottom, snapping it up in the air and working them back to the boat, you catch more fish. And the reason being is you're checking your bait a lot more because you're casting, right? And you can feel if that gets fouled. Number 2, when you're snap jigging straight up in the air and letting it fall, you're not dragging that slime and all that garbage that's on the bottom. And this doesn't have to be just on Winnebagoche. Anywhere where you get dying or vegetation's that's sort of decaying, milfoil's terrible in some of these lakes, some of this algae crud that grew all summer that's dying off. If you're snap jigging your jig straight up in the air, letting it fall straight up in the air rather than off to the side. So I'm saying like straight up in the air, like a 90-degree angle, and then you're dropping that rod tip down, allowing that bait to fall on a slack line, and then snapping it up in the air. And it's more of just like a wrist snap. If you're doing that, your baits aren't going to be fouled as much, and you're not going to have to deal with all that slime and that crud. I know anglers that have been up on Winnie. I've talked to countless anglers and people that have been in my boat, other anglers that I see out there, people that I've talked in the fish cleaning shack, at the landings. They're all complaining about this crud. And as starry stonewort starts to creep into some of our lakes, you're going to see this more and more. Also, this dying algae, some of the byproduct of zebra mussels, for example, is this phosphorus that it gives off. Its shells give off phosphorus. So you see a lot of this green algae that grows. Well, as soon as that dies and decays, it may grow on plant vegetation. As soon as that dies off, that falls to the bottom. If you're jig fishing on the bottom, you're going to snag that stuff. So you're going to encounter this more and more. And so if you go to an artificial rather than a drag with a live bait, go to an artificial like a paddle tail, like a Crush City Jerk, even a hair jig, and you're snapping it up and letting it fall, you're going to be less fouled. And I'm telling you, part of the reason the fish are reacting to these baits, but they're also hitting these baits because they're not fouled with all this garbage and gunk on there. Believe me, I've been fishing on a lot of these different lakes, and you throw just a jig and a minnow out there and you drag it on the bottom, within seconds, you've got all this debris on there and you're not going to catch fish, especially in clear water with all that gunk on there. And so if you take my advice, put 6-pound braid on, 10-pound braid. I like to use a fluorocarbon leader. Snap that bait up in the air, let it fall. Continue that momentum all the way back to the boat. You're going to catch more fish on Winnie, on Leech, on Mille Lacs, all of the above. So let's get into the Leech lake bite now. because Leech is really, really starting to fire. I love it on Leech Lake. This is what I love about Leech Lake. First of all, it's a walleye factory. It's a gem that we have in Minnesota. It's a lake that, just, I don't want to say a lot of people take for granted, but it's, sometimes gets overlooked with people coming from Mille Lacs and then heading to Lake of the Woods. Now, Leech Lake does get a lot of pressure. There's a lot of people out there taking advantage of it. People that are hardcore leech anglers know that is an absolute walleye factory. But what I love about Leech Lake more than anything is as you get into the fall here, especially when you get a couple of consistent wind days, you can catch walleyes on Leech extremely shallow, right? I'm talking 2-3 feet of water, 4 feet of water, pitching jigs and big minnows, jigs and small minnows, jigs and plastics. You can throw big chubs up in shallow water. I absolutely love it because that is one of my favorite places to catch walleyes in 2, 3, 4 feet of water, but you have to do it right. And if you're heading to Leech Lake, that lake in a lot of areas, Walker Bay in particular, but all over Leech Lake has cleared up as well. And you've got to stay away from those fish. So if you're pitching to these fish, make sure you're maintaining your boat distance at 50 to 60 feet away from those fish if you can, sometimes more at times, and you're pitching up to them and kind of working along those shorelines, spot locking, not running your big motor, not driving over the top of the fish. Rem was talking last week about running side imaging to find schools of fish in shallow water. This is where side imaging really, really shines, is when you can drive along these shorelines, sort of looking for big balls of bait on Leech Lake. And then, of course, big numbers of walleyes up in the sand on those rock edges. Sometimes these shallow water rock points that stick out into the lake that get wind blown are just an absolute ambush point for these walleyes, and they load up on those things. So if you're heading to Leech Lake, plan on fishing shallow. These fish are moving shallower, and try to get some live bait. I love fishing like shiners, for example, or if you can get some small red tails, anything on that neon moon eye jig, either 1/8 ounce or 1/4 ounce jigs, and then pitching them up into shallow water and rip jigging them. Plastics work too. Don't overlook some of these shallow water weeds. Walleyes on Leech Lake love weed lines. If you can find any vegetation in any of the bays, they're going to hold fish. And don't be afraid to get really, really shallow. I'm talking up in the bulrushes. I'm talking way up in the weeds. These fish will go extremely shallow. And I have had some phenomenal days where you see the birds diving, right up in the weeds. Get right up in there and cast up in there. You'll be amazed how many walleyes, even if you don't have forward-facing sonar, if you don't have side imaging, if you work the edges of shallow water edges of weed lines, if you see birds diving into an area, go to that area, keep your boat away, casting like you're bass fishing and power fishing down an entire weed line. You're going to have an absolute phenomenal day on Leech Lake, and you're going to have, fishing memories of a lifetime, because it's that sort of lake. That shallow water bite is extremely good. And as we get towards October, later October, there's just not the boat traffic out there, right? You got people that, especially up in that region, you got tons of people that are concerned about putting up deer stands. You have lots of people that are duck hunting. You have people that are grouse hunting, and a lot of anglers just aren't out there in big numbers like they would have been, let's say, in early May or right after fishing opener, when that shallow water bite is good. And so taking advantage of it right now, MEA weekend is going to be prime on Leech Lake. And stay away from the boats. Don't go to the flotilla of boats. Generally speaking, if you see a big mass flotilla of boats, 5, 10, 15 boats on Leech, usually you're too late to the party. Those fish have already bit and they're gone. If you see a flotilla of boats though, and you want to fish, and you don't have the greatest electronics, work down from those boats. You can get away from the pack, and generally, those fish will be in that area, but you slide down the brake line a little bit, you move along that weed edge, you're going to find big numbers of fish because they're starting to move in. Those roaming packs of fish that were kind of out in that sand, deeper sand pockets, the weed, the rock piles, some of the deeper weeds, all those fish are starting to slide in on Leech, and It is prime Leech. From now until those surface temperatures are about 50 degrees on Leech, it's going to be lights out. Game on. Like, this is peak. This is when you take advantage of it. So get out to Leech Lake if you can. OnX Fish is the best tool I have ever used for finding new lakes to target. Quickly filter lakes by species, then select trophy potential, high abundance, keeper potential, or high stocking effort to find the fish you're after in the size and the numbers you are trying to catch. Download from the App Store today to get research tools for the serious anglers and beginners alike, giving you the data to target the right lakes and the confidence to get there. Use tools like recent imagery, fishing hotspot data, or the best-in-class weather features that call out current wind, weather, barometer, moon phase, majors and minors, along with precip and more. OnX Fish is a phenomenal tool both on and off the water for discovering new fishing opportunities, many of which you'd never known existed. Download OnX Fish Midwest today, the app that is changing the game on ice and open water.
Runnings Home, Farm, and Outdoor stores are celebrating 78 years, serving 90 local communities across the Upper Midwest, the Northeast, and America's Heartland. Runnings has everything you and your family need for your home, on the farm, and in the outdoors. Lawn and garden, hardware, farm and ranch supplies, sporting goods, housewares, snacks, and everything for your pets. Go to runnings.com to find one of the 90 locations near you, or shop online anytime at runnings.com. Runnings, your home, farm, and outdoor store.
Let's talk Lake of the Woods. Lake of the Woods has been phenomenal. A lot of these fish from the basin out in Lake of the Woods are going to start staging on that South Shore. That's Lake of the Woods is hard to talk about because obviously if you're up in the Canadian side, that fishes differently from the South Shore. But I want to specifically talk that South Shore and then the Rainy River, because as these shiners start to get ready to do their run, the Rainy River lights up again, and it lights up in a big way, but you don't have to deal with the traffic that you do in the spring. You get out there in the fall, there's next to nobody. It's, hardly any boats out there at all. And so Lake of the Woods, I have not been there yet. I'm hoping to get there next week. I think as we get towards next week, these shiners are going to start to run. Lake of the Woods is one of those destinations, and even the Rainy River is one of those destinations in the spring and fall that you can't really put a calendar date to, right? You have to just wait till surface temperatures drop and those shiners start to move in. Same with the spring. You can't really just put a date on the calendar. You have to wait until the ice starts breaking up before kind of the rivers start breaking up and the runoff starts going in. You have to time it perfectly. The fall is no different. If you're going up to Rainy River this fall, you have to time it perfectly. And I will say with great confidence, these fish are starting to move in along Pine Island. They're not quite in the river yet. Well, there might be some fish in the river. I've seen some good reports of fish starting to slide in the river, but I'm saying those big numbers of shiners aren't in the river yet, and the walleyes are just starting to show up. But as we get towards the end of the month, these next 2 weeks, if you want to experience world-class walleye fishing, the Rainy River's it, man. It really is. When the emerald shiners come in, if you can pick a nice day and play hooky at work, or if you get a day off and race up there, it's worth the drive. Even if you got to go up for a day, stay overnight, fish, and then come home the next day or something, it's worth that drive just to do that. It is really fun in the fall. This is reaching peak period for them as well. But even if you're going up there this weekend, I wouldn't overlook the river. Start in the river if it's windy. If it's not windy, go out to the lake, get out past Pine Island, past the Gap, and just start catching fish, because right now is, again, phenomenal fall fishing. Last, I want to talk about Mille Lacs, because I've been out in Mille Lacs a few times this week as well. And Mille Lacs is finally starting to fire as far as big numbers and a jig bite. We've seen this inconsistent, at least I have, I've seen this inconsistent shallow water bite really since August, where, I was catching fish on certain spots, shallow water, under 12 feet of water, primarily bobber fishing for the better half of a month and a half, almost 2 months now. And I had some glimpses of these really good snap jigging plastics bites, but then they would go away. As soon as we'd have the warm-ups here in October, that really good snap jigging bite would go away. It's starting to return. This week, I did still catch quite a few fish on bobbers, so don't put away the bobbers if you're heading to Mille Lacs. The bobber bite's really good, especially the evening bites, right? The shallow water evening bite, if you've talked to any of the launch drivers, any of the resorts, it's really starting to fire, not just with small fish, but a lot of big fish as well. I think Mille Lacs is going to be an unbelievable bite this winter, and for a couple of reasons. One, we still have a ton of bait in the lake, and that's going to sort of kill the bite early on Mille Lacs. When I mean early, I mean like mid-January. That bite's going to slow down big time. But early ice on Mille Lacs should be phenomenal. And for this reason is what I'm seeing is huge numbers of walleyes that are 10 to 12, even 13 inches. And then I'm seeing pretty good numbers of fish that are 14 to 17 inches, and then really good numbers of 17 to, let's say, 23, 24-inch fish, and then okay numbers of fish over that. But all of these fish are starting to slide in the shallow rocks right now. The evening bobber bite is off the charts good, right? If you get up on rock piles, if you get on gravel bars and you spot lock or anchor up or whatever you got to do in the evenings, and the evenings are coming a lot quicker than they were a month ago. If you want a good evening bite, you better get out there, 4:30, 5 o'clock, you can get a really good jigs and plastics bite in. Before that, you can bobber up and just absolutely wail on them till dark. And then you can start trolling after dark. Night trolling is a thing. They're allowing it finally to be able to night troll on Mille Lacs Lake. And a lot of anglers are taking advantage of that and catching awesome numbers of fish. But with the amount of anglers that I've referenced, it's a drop in the bucket compared to the anglers that used to go out there in the fall. I mean, I've seen very few anglers, in the afternoon, evenings heading out on the lake. But if you want to have a lot of fun catching fish, trolling at night, this would be the weekend to do it. It looks like first half of ME weekend up here, it's going to be sort of a big southeast blow, rainy. But as we get towards Saturday, Sunday, it's going to be beautiful. We're going to have some really killer evenings. So if you want to get out and bobber bite, I know a lot of people might be coming up to take care of deer stands, might be doing a little grouse hunting, maybe duck hunting in the mornings. But if you want phenomenal afternoon fishing, get up onto some of these rock piles, some of these shoreline breaks. A lot of these fish are starting to move in. They're up on structure. And don't settle until you see fish. If you have forward-facing sonar, if you have side imaging, if you have 2D electronics, get up on these structures and drive around until you find them, because there are spots where there's some fish and there's other spots that are getting absolutely loaded right now. If you want to snap jig plastics, if you want to snap jig moontail jigs, hair jigs, minnows, shiners, I'm starting to get a few on shiners here, even some small red tails and chubs. The one thing about Mille Lacs is make sure you're calling ahead if you're looking for bait and trying to find shiners. It's always a struggle this time of year. You can get away with, on Mille Lacs, they do like some small, let's say sucker minnows or chubs. You don't necessarily have to use shiners, but also bring the plastics, the paddle tails, the minnow profile tails, putting them on, let's say, a 1/4 ounce jig, that moon eye jig, that VMC moon eye jig that I've been referencing all podcast has been my go-to on Mille Lacs, and just snap jigging those. But the one thing about Mille Lacs is just like the other lakes, momentarily touching the bottom, ripping it straight up in the air. Now, in a lot of areas, you don't have to deal with the slime like you do on Leech and Winnie in areas, but on Mille Lacs, you have a lot of rocks, especially if you're fishing rocks. You have a lot of zebra mussels. And so I highly recommend a fluorocarbon leader of, let's say, 10-pound test. If you're using that fluorocarbon leader, it gives you a couple things. It gives you, you're not tying braid directly to your jig. And so that line viz thing kind of goes away for fish. But the biggest thing it gives you is abrasion resistance. Okay. Your line is not getting nicked like you would with monofilament. If you're just throwing monofilament out there, those zebra mussels nick your line so easily if you're touching the bottom that it literally cuts your line or nicks your line. So the next bite you get, you lose a fish. And so I highly recommend a fluorocarbon leader. You don't necessarily need it with bobbers. I use a lot of monofilament with bobbers, but when I'm snap jigging plastics, you definitely need that. And so I like to use Suffolk's advanced fluorocarbon. I love it. I have really good success with it. On lakes where you have a lot of pike and zebra mussels, for example, like there's areas of Leech and Winnie, there's areas of lots of small lakes that have tons and tons of small pike. And if you're snap jigging, you're going to lose baits. Don't be afraid to upsize to like a 12-pound fluorocarbon. What I like about this presentation where you're really snap jigging and you're working these baits pretty fast, these fish don't have a long time to analyze that bait. And so when you're upsizing that fluorocarbon, don't worry about it. It'll keep you from losing a lot of baits, and you're going to catch a lot more fish. Even if your line gets a little bit nicked, you can still bring that fish in without breaking line. And one good tip for you is if you are snap jigging on the bottom, or you do catch a pike, or you catch a walleye that may have it a little bit deeper in its throat. It doesn't have to be super deep, but with a plastic or any live bait jig, even if it's down in their mouth, you know, they don't have teeth like walleyes, but they can still nick your line. And so every time I'm really fishing heavy, aggressive rock, for example, that has zebra mussels in it, or I catch a pike, I'm always checking my leaders. I'm always checking my customers' leaders to make sure that that line's not nicked, because you don't want to be snapping off. I hate snapping off. It drives me crazy. It happens as an angler. You're going to snap off at times, but it absolutely drives me nuts. If you go to a heavier fluorocarbon, that advanced fluorocarbon is my go-to. You're going to break off way less on fish. So, you know, that's sort of my go-to right now. It's only going to get better as we get towards the weekend into next week. If you're looking to take some time off, if you're looking to take someone fishing, if you just want to get the boat out for one last time before you winterize it, if you got chores to do at your lake place, whether it's pulling docks, whatever, you know, I highly recommend getting out this time of year. It is just magical. Now, I want to get away from the walleye bite a little bit because I do want to touch on some panfish. I had an opportunity to fish with my Uncle Gary this week. I fished with my dad this week. We did a couple different bites. I'm winding down my guide season as we get towards MEA weekend here. That's it for me for guiding. It's not it for me for fishing, but it's definitely going to be it for me for guiding. And I'm hoping we get some decent weather because I want to do more pan fishing in particular. I want to get out with my dad a couple more times. I want to get out with my Uncle Gary. I love doing it in the spring and fall. Us, you know, as roaches, I clump us all in the same category. We all grew up pan fishing, love pan fishing. To this day, if you know me, if you listen to this podcast, if you watch Dialed in Angling, I love pan fishing. I absolutely love it. I have since I've been a little kid, and fall is so magical. And I've had such a great pan fishing fall. You know, I've talked about it on past podcasts as far as, you know, crappie starting to slide to wintering areas, perch moving in the shallows. They're still biting. I've had a great week. I've been able to get out pan fishing just a few hours one day with my Uncle Gary and my dad, and then did sort of a donated trip. I had one of my customers that I promised I'd take out fishing. My Uncle Gary jumped in the boat with us. We went out perch fishing. So I want to talk about both of those bites. Let's start with the perch. I absolutely love perch fishing in the fall. And now perch are a species that I absolutely love, but I also can hate in the same breath. And that's because perch move so much. In one instance, they could be up in 3-4 feet of water. In the next instance, they're out in the basin. They're moving around. They're always looking for food. You got to key in on the big ones. Sometimes you have to deal with a lot of small ones to get to the big ones. Sometimes they're in the vegetation. Other times they're in the sand. They're always moving, right? They're getting chased by predators. They're getting spooked by the boat. If you've ever seen perch on forward-facing sonar, summer and winter, they're always on the move. You drill a hole over the top of them, they're moving, right? So as a guide, it's a fish that I love to hate because when you land on them, it's electrical, it's magical. So much fun to catch, especially jumbo perch, like massive jumbo perch like we see on Mille Lacs, like we're seeing on Winnie, Leech, Cass, all of our lakes in Minnesota. Over in Devil's Lake, they have created a whole industry with the perch patrol, the perch train, everything to do with perch over in the Dakotas. And, that's because they're fun to catch and they're electrical and they're awesome and they're a special species. And so this fall, if I can get on perch, I do it. I've had some really good perch trips with customers, but getting on with my Uncle Gary and my customer the other day was special because surface temps have dropped a little bit, but they're not plummeting. These perch are still really shallow. So if you're going to, a Leech, a Winnie, a Cass, any of the lakes up there in that area, you can still find perch up in that 4 to 10 foot range pretty readily. And what I've been doing is really, I've been snap jigging for walleyes and throwing on schools of walleyes, but I've been watching my forward facing sonar, seeking out patches of vegetation, seeking out these areas where these perch might be clinging to, even for a little bit. They might not be just staying in that weed bed, but sometimes you get a little bit of standing vegetation or enough bottom cover where all of a sudden, boom, you run into schools of perch. Now, with the water clarity being the way it is on a Winnie, on a Leech, all of these lakes that I've referenced, perch are getting a lot more spooky, just like the walleyes. And so if you see them, you got to cast to them. So what I've been doing is I've been taking like a tungsten moon eye jig or even just a small lead head jig, like the hardball jigs, and tipping it with a fat head and then just hanging it on the side of the boat. So my bait's not in the water, right? It's just ready, sitting on a seat or sitting in the back of my boat, ready to go. And then I've been walleye fishing, casting these schools of walleyes, either spot locked or running my trolling motor slow, casting these schools of walleyes with plastics. And as soon as I see those schools of perch, you'll see those little bowling balls on the bottom. It might be strung out on the bottom. As soon as I see those schools of perch, I reel in the plastic, boom, and I deploy that minnow, and I get those fish fired up. As soon as you can get one to react to your bait, you tell your customers or your co-anglers or whoever's in the boat, get ready, here they are, cast over here. And then boom, boom, boom. Once you get those fish feeding, they get aggressive, right? And they're boom, and they're firing off the bottom and they're feeding, but you have to keep their attention. That roaming aspect of those perch, if you catch a perch, let's say you throw it in the live ball, throw it back, whatever you're doing, and you go to rebait with a minnow and you get back and you start looking on forward facing sonar, where did they go? They're moving, they're roaming, they're constantly moving. And so having another angler ready to cast a bait in there is really, really key. And if your co-anglers are on plastics or whatever, just have them pitch their jig in there. And these big jumbo perch will hit plastics. They love plastics. But just keeping their attention until you can get bait on your hook and get back in there helps. And trust me, someone who spends countless hours looking at forward-facing sonar, I'm always amazed how quickly jumbo perch can be there and then gone. And this is open water, this is on ice, and they're just that type of fish that I love to hate. I love catching them. I love it when you're in them, but it's very, very frustrating when they're on the move like that. And sometimes it just has to do with like immature loons diving down to the bottom and chasing schools. Loons are everywhere right now. You see all these loons with a little bit of a white face. Those are immature loons. The nesting pairs are gone, and these immature loons are feeding and chasing bait around. So they're up there chasing bait. It could be birds diving. It could be the bait fish moving. It could be pike chasing them. It could be walleye schools chasing them. Whatever it is, these perch are always on the move, so you have to be ready to catch them. Now, a little bit of vegetation or something to hold those fish, even a rock pile, can hold some of these perch. If you can find that, they'll hold a little bit longer sometimes if you can find them in those areas. But these jumbo perch have been showing up. Usually when you get to that time frame where surface temps start to get below 55 degrees, you start to see these jumbo perch disappear, especially from the really shallow water. They start to slide out a little bit deeper. They start to get a little more scattered. But right now, that upper 50s, lower 60s water temp, this is key. This is peak period once again for jumbo perch. So if you want to get out for MEA weekend, you want to get kids on an incredible fishing experience, go to Leech Lake, go to Winnebagosh, take them perch fishing. You won't regret it. get up into shallow waters. There's lots of areas on all those lakes that the perch are biting incredibly well. Even in some of these areas, if you have to weed through some of the smaller ones to find the jumbos, it's a really fun experience. Some of my earliest memories of MEA weekend was perch fishing with my dad on Lake Winnebagosh and just having a ball. Every time you dropped the line, every time you dropped your jig in, you were catching one. It was one after another, after another, after another. Those are the type of memories that hooked me on fishing. That's why I love fall fishing. That's why this is the peak period. Same can be said about crappie fishing. Get out there. These crappies and bluegills are staging off the edges of these break lines. These weeds are dying off. They're in big time numbers. Whether you have forward facing sonar or you just want to cast or even troll, I don't overlook trolling, like a small jig in plastic behind the boat, even a small spinner with a crappie minnow on it, and just trolling the edges of these weed lines until you find these crappies. And then once you find them, you can spot lock and cast to these big schools of fish. Don't be intimidated if you don't have the greatest electronics. You can take small boats out. You can cast bobbers along the edges of weed lines with plastics. A lot of these lakes, the crappies will slide in on the evenings. Incredible, incredible fishing experiences to be had on this weekend. So I hope everybody gets out and enjoys this MEA weekend. If you're in Minnesota, whether you get out hunting and fishing, just start making memories with your kids, with your grandkids, neighbor kids, even other sportsmen out there. That's why I get fired up about MEA weekend. It's sort of last call for my guiding season, but I've got a lot of fishing to do with my family. I'm fortunate enough to be able to get out, like I said, with my dad, my Uncle Gary, my son. My daughter's going to do a little fishing and hunting this weekend with me. I can't wait. I'm fired up. I'm going to take advantage of it. Fall is a short window. We are slowly slipping into winter, but it's going to come quicker than you think. So get out and take advantage of it. Thanks for tuning into the Dialed In Angling podcast. We've got more next week. We're going to start talking a little more ice fishing, some gear that's coming out. If you've been following social media, there's a lot of new ice fishing gear that's starting to hit the market. There's a lot of teaser videos out there. I want to talk about that next week. We're also going to talk more fall fishing next week, of course. Thanks for tuning in to Dialed In Angling. Good luck fishing, everybody. Until next week, I'm Tony Roach, and this has been the Dialed In Angling podcast.